gathered every vein and switch liqueur, of which vertu ungenred is the floor. When Zephyrus eke with his sweat breath, inspired hath in every holt and heth, the tendre cropes and the young sun, hath in the ram his halve corsair run. And small a foolish mocking melodia, that slepen all the nicht with open ear, so pricketh him nature in ear courages, then longen folk to gon on pilgrimages. And palmerus for to saken straunges strondes, to ferne always couth in sundry londes, and specially from every shiro sende of Engeland, to Counterbury they vende, that holy blissful martyr for to sake, that him hath holpen when that they were sake. And the words mean, the month of April has a sweet, sweet rain that showers down on mountain, heath, and plain. It soaks into the ground like heaven's wine and gives birth to the flower and the vine. The gentle breezes kiss across the land, caress new planted crops with loving hand. The air is fresh and sweet, and everyone goes forth anew beneath a smiling sun. The little birds all lose themselves in song and sleep with both eyes open all night long because the season's joy excites them so. And that's when folk on pilgrimages go. The rich set sail into the land of palms to pledge devotion and to give their alms, while lesser folk of England turn their feet toward Canterbury to show their faith complete. To Thomas Becket's grave they make their way, the saint whose love can heal the sick, they say. Befell that in that session on a die, in Souther got the tabard as he lie, full ready to venden on me pilgrimage toward Counterbury with full devout courage. At Nick fas commento that hostelria, full 29 in a compagnia of sundry folk be aventuri fall, in fellowship and pilgrimus were they all. They chanced to fall into fellowship, and pilgrims were they all, as are we all, diverse pilgrims to a common destination.
Thank you, Reverend McCarty. We are so pleased to have you back with us this Sunday in our pulpit and with your voice. Good morning. My name is Barbara Bonney, and I will serve as your worship leader today. I'm grateful to share this service with you this morning, both in person and online. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. Our congregation was founded in 1830, and we have worshiped in this building since 1889. And we acknowledge that we occupy land that is the ancestral home of the Adena and Hopewell cultures, and the Miamia and Shawnee peoples. Our church is a place you can bring your whole self, your full identity, your questioning mind, and your expansive heart. We are a community committed to anti-racism, social justice, and to supporting the various spiritual and ethical paths of our members and friends. You will see signs all over the building for various things that we hope will help you feel comfortable here. These accommodations, such as gender-neutral restrooms and hearing assistance devices, are listed on your order of service. Please ask our ushers if you have any questions. If you would like to know more about our church or about the Unitarian Universalist faith, please contact us by emailing member-care@firstuu.com. During the service, please enjoy the flowers donated today by Alan and Molly Fleury for their 10th wedding anniversary. Now for the lighting of our chalice. It is not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change. Charles Darwin. Because we are living beings, change is our constant companion. To remain the same is to stop growing and learning, to stop living. We light our chalice today as a symbol not only of our chosen faith, but as a tribute to how important change is in our journey to become more fully and authentically human. Please rise as you are willing and able and join us in singing our opening hymn, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. The words will appear on our screen. Now, please turn and greet your neighbors. If you're watching online, please say hi in the chat. Usually Meredith would be introducing her time. Okay. Oh. Usually Meredith would introduce her Time for All Ages, and she can't be here today, so she asked me to channel her. Impossible. Beloveds, I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but did you know that today, April 2nd, is National Children's Picture Book Day? It's true. While usually I do my best to pair my Time for All Ages with each service theme, I could not pass up this opportunity to share with you everything that goes into crafting a recorded Time for All Ages. I originally made this video 2 years ago, so you may not be surprised to learn that some aspects of this process have changed, having been refined and streamlined over time. Rest assured, it no longer takes me so many hours to craft a recorded time for all ages. But the day being what it is, you know I have to wonder, what's your favorite picture book? lot of work. We will now dismiss the children to their classrooms as we sing Go Now in Peace. Part of being a beloved community is sharing joys and concerns with each other. If you would like to share something with the congregation through our Circle of Friends email or in the newsletter, or if you'd like to talk with our resident chaplain, Mary Tarbell Green, please fill out the form on the back of your order of service and place it in the offering basket either when it is passed or on the desk at the back of the sanctuary as you leave the service. And now we will take time to honor the joys and sorrows that are in our hearts. This water before me represents the love of our community. We drop a stone in the water to seek the softening of our sorrows or the amplification of our joys. All the individual joys and sorrows come together in one bowl of water so they can be symbolically shared and borne by our community. We invite you now to come forward if you wish, up the side aisles and back down the middle to amplify your joy or soften your sorrow. We will now drop 3 more stones in our water of community. One for all the joys and sorrows outside these walls that go unmentioned. A second stone for those joys and sorrows that go unspoken, but we have closely guarded in our hearts. And lastly, a stone for the brokenness of our world, as we search for ways to be agents of wholeness by placing ourselves in that breach. Now let's consider how we can give back to First Church and help build a bright future together. As we prepare for our offering today, we want to remind you that our Share the Plate recipient for this month is the Ohio Valley Forestry Fellowship. The Ohio Valley Forestry Fellowship works toward increasing the size and diversity of our forest canopy. They plant as well as distribute seedlings and educate people on best practices. You may have walked through one of their forests. They've been reforesting the Ohio Valley for 40 years. We will learn all about this exciting organization during our April 23rd worship service. Giving to First Church is easy. You can text the word GIVE to 513-717-7373. If you have access to our Breeze member system, you may click Give Now, or you can give online at firstuu.com. You can also write a check to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati and mail it to 536 Linton Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45219. If you want to give to the Ohio Valley Forestry Fellowship, write Ohio Forests or OVFF in the memo line of your check. If this is your first time with us, please let the virtual plate pass you by. Your presence is gift enough to our church. This reading is from A Feminist Ethic of Risk by Dr. Sharon D. Welch. I contend that divinity is not a mark of that which is other than finite. Grace is not that which comes from outside to transform the conditions of finitude. Divinity, or grace, is the resilient, fragile, healing power of finitude itself. The terms holy and divine denote a quality of being within the web of life, a process of healing relationship, and they denote the quality of being worthy of honor, love, respect, and affirmation. The need for continued critique and transformation does not mean that the impulse and power present in our work is not divine. The fact that we experience moments of defeat, of being outmaneuvered, does not mean that our power is not divine. Creative power, the power of love, and the power of the web of life can never guarantee results of its operation. When freed to be creative, people's responses can delight or dismay, but they always escape our control. In solidarity with others, in work for justice, we remain human. Our vision is ever growing. Our strategies have partial successes and require continual critique and revision. Yet this work, though partial in its depth and scope, is divine. We who are feminist theologians find much that is divine. Work for justice, love, creativity itself, the web of life, joy, and beauty. By naming joy as divine, we affirm that these aspects of human existence are worthy of worship. Humanity is not merely immersed in natural processes, responding to them blindly, but is aware of the complex patterns of life and the ways in which life's richness exceeds our intellectual grasp. We transcend instinct, but need to learn that nature also transcends us. Our actions have consequences far greater than our ability to predict. We are not condemned to a foolish, hasty mode of acting. We can act deliberately in awareness of these limits.
Well, certainly one thing we've learned in the last decade or so is that life is definitely unpredictable. In the process, I think we've also seen that no victory and no defeat is ever as complete as it seems in the moment. Progress brings change, and change is an uncertain business, and that goes for churches just as much as world affairs or, heaven knows, NCAA basketball. Unitarian Universalist theologian Sharon D. Welch, one of my favorites, talks about that in her book, A Feminist Ethic of Risk. She writes, "What we know, though vast, rests on shaky foundations. As we attempt to ascertain the effects of our actions, we are challenged to keep in mind the law of unintended consequences. Our actions, no matter how carefully thought out, have unpredictable consequences for good or ill, often for both. The law of unintended consequences. Progress only comes with change, but change is an uncertain business. Actions have unanticipated reactions." Now, for the record, the work for justice and equality is essential to Professor Welch's Feminist Ethic of Risk, but I also chose her for the reading this morning because her wisdom is a helpful lens for looking at all life's vicissitudes, trials, and also life's surprises. My own life is a study in the law of unintended consequences. I loved being read to as a kid. By the age of 8, I was reading far above grade level. Somewhere along the line in there, I decided I was going to become a world-famous novelist myself. And all through school, I considered myself a great writer in training. I would watch the way people behaved and try to understand why. I wrote stories through elementary school and high school and majored in English in college. After college, I got married, did my required military service, and fathered a couple of children. And all that while, from grade school through my 20s, I would return to tablets and notebooks, and then later evenings at the typewriter. I got frustrated and gave up more than once. But I'd always lick my wounds and sooner or later start over again. And in my 30s, I did get several novels published nationally. Here's a bunch of them. For what it's worth, this guy here is a riff off of Palamon in The Knight's Tale, in the Canterbury Tales. Wonder where that came from. But being a published novelist was not what I had expected. Sales were not as good as I'd hoped. Frankly, the world was not interested in renovated Chaucer, his fantasy. Years passed by. I was not writing the books I wanted to write, that I'd set out wanting to write. I wanted something more, something meatier, something that would make a meaningful difference in people's lives. And what I didn't know was all those years reading, honing my writing skills, my fascination with human nature and the human condition, none of that would ever make me a real successful novelist. It certainly didn't make me a great one, but it was perfect training to become a Unitarian Universalist minister. And that was the biggest surprise of my whole life. Change and the law of unintended consequences. If you had told me, even at age 40, that I would turn out to be a minister, let alone that I'd wind up living in Indiana and preaching in Cincinnati, I'd have told you you were crazy. Giving up my career as a novelist, I have to admit, was the most painful thing I've ever had to do. It was even harder than getting divorced. But it was also the smartest thing I ever did. I hadn't even finished divinity school when I was wishing that I'd started 20 years earlier. We cannot grow and develop and achieve our potential until we accept the reality of change and also of surprise. We nurture our best selves by nurturing change and dancing with surprise, all in light of the fact that we never do know exactly what that change will bring us. Change and the law of unintended consequences. Now, for the record, I am proudly an atheist, but being an atheist does not mean that I lack faith. To face life's challenges and unintended consequences, and more than that, to face them with a stout heart and positive attitude requires faith, that we can surf life's unpredictable water, and that something worthy will eventually come of our efforts. And believe me, in today's world, that is a stubborn kind of faith. I'm just saying. One of my favorite examples of the richness of change and unintended consequences begins with the 18th century English Unitarian minister Joseph Priestley. In his spare time, there he is. Priestley was a scientist in his spare time, and he was a good one. He discovered seltzer water. That's what he was best known for in his own lifetime. He was the first person to describe photosynthesis, and what he's best remembered for now is that he was also the first person to isolate the gas oxygen. But in 1766, among his other adventures, he built what he called an electricity machine, and today we'd call it a static generator. And playing around with sparks from his electricity machine, he found out spectacularly that if he made a spark in a vial of swamp gas, which we now know is mostly methane, he'd get an explosion. Now later, he became a vocal supporter of the American and French revolutions, and that so angered his neighbors in Birmingham, England, they burned his house and laboratory to the ground. So he fled to the United States, founded the Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, and faded from the scientific picture. But other scientists kept working on his explosive swamp gas discovery. They were hoping to turn it into a weapon, a swamp gas pistol fired with electricity. Meanwhile, scenery change, an Italian named Giovanni Venturi didn't like the smell of sickness and rot in the hospital where he worked, so he invented a device called an atomizer to spray perfume and mask the odors. The key part of his spray bottle, where the liquid perfume mixed with air to form a mist, is still named for him. It's called a Venturi. Later yet, in the 1850s, some people in Titusville, Pennsylvania were figuring out what to do with the nasty crude oil that seeped out of the ground in a place called Oil Creek in Pennsylvania. You may have heard of this name. A man named Edwin Drake figured out how to drill for the oil and obtain it in bulk, and another man, Samuel Martin Keir, figured out how to refine it into lamp oil, which they named after him, kerosene. His refining process also produced a dangerously explosive byproduct which they threw away. That later became known as gasoline. Now you can probably see where this is all going. In the late 1800s, German inventor Nicholas Otto realized he could pump tiny amounts of this gasoline through Venturi's atomizer, blow it up with a spark from Priestley's generator, and the explosion would push down an even older invention originally developed in the 1690s to pump wastewater out of mines, namely a piston. The piston would turn a crankshaft, and voila, you had the automobile engine. And that's the law of unintended consequences in action. Every component of the modern car engine was originally invented by someone trying to invent something else. Venturi's atomizer became the carburetor. You just saw that. A 4-barrel carburetor has 4 Venturis. Priestley's swamp gas pistol became the spark plug, and so on. Things will develop in ways no one could predict. As we dance with life, in Sharon D. Welch's words, our actions, no matter how carefully thought out, or sometimes precisely because they are carefully thought out, have multiple consequences for good or ill, often for both. Close quote. Of course, we're now realizing that standard automobile engines have had a terrible effect on the world's climate. We spent most of a century, especially in America, believing that cars were a great invention without a serious downside, and now we're dealing with some of that downside, among which is climate change. We're also having a lot of trouble convincing enough people that climate change even exists to take the necessary steps to combat it, as Sharon D. Welch writes. People's responses can delight or dismay, but they always escape our control. That's part of the feminist ethic of risk. That's also the negative side of creativity. So we're seeing some of the harm that can follow when people try to ignore the law of unintended consequences. We get changes we don't want. We need to journey into change with curiosity, faith, and resolve to nurture the consequences that help to make the world a better place, and to deal with the negative consequences because they're also going to be there. For what it's worth, that is one key piece of Professor Welch's feminine ethic of risk. It accepts that we cannot keep the world from changing. We cannot make our advantages and comforts static or permanent. It takes courage and effort to accept the risks of change and deal with the positive and negative consequences of change. Back in the 1920s, when my father was just a farm boy in eastern Iowa, my grandfather bought the family's first car, a used Model T Ford. And his grandmother, or his mother-in-law, I should say, my great-grandmother, Grandma Eby, they called her, lived with them. And she asked how fast that car would go, to which my grandfather replied, "Oh, it'll get up to 15 or 20 miles an hour." And her mouth fell open, and she said, "Land sakes, people weren't made to go that fast." And she would not ride in it. Decades passed before anyone could talk her into getting into a car. Now, for the record, her daughter, my grandmother, didn't have any problem riding in cars, but no way was she ever going to get onto an airplane. And she never did. So I have to admit, I don't come from a line of real visionary people. All I can do is look at the lessons of the past and try to project them onto my own behavior in the future. And maybe what's most important about that, try to understand that I'm going to get a little uncomfortable with all this. Having spent most of my ministry in Columbus, Indiana, and staying with the automotive theme, I have to tell this story. Columbus now has, you probably know, but in case you don't, Cummins diesel. Now that story begins right after the First World War. The Miller family of Columbus owned what was called Irwin Union Trust. It was a very large banking institution. They were one of the richest families in the country. Their chauffeur was a fellow by the name of Plessy Cummins, and he liked to tinker around with car engines in the garage in his spare time. So the family set him up in business in 1919, heavily funding a startup they called Cummins Diesel. And actually, we need to take the diesel part of the story back to the 1800s to Germany. An inventor named Rudolf Diesel envisioned an engine which could run on cheap fuel and produce power more efficiently than the steam engines of his day. He got research funding from Germany's famous Krupp Steel Works, but what they wanted was an engine that would run on coal dust, which actually was too explosive for the purpose. The problem with coal dust is that his engines kept blowing up. So he tried something else, and by 1898, he had come up with a working engine which he exhibited at the World's Fair that year in Paris. It ran quite nicely on, of all things, peanut oil. And diesel engines ran on vegetable oils clear into the 1920s. The catch was, Rudolf Diesel's engines were really large and heavy. They weighed as much as 400 pounds for every single horsepower they produced. For that reason, they could only be used for stationary industrial power or later on ships and then on as railroad engine power. Anyway, back in the United States, after the First World War, the Miller family bought the rights to Diesel's German patents, and Plessy Cummins started trying to design a diesel engine small enough to fit into a car. He worked on it for more than 10 years, and finally, by 1929, he had one small enough to install in a Packard limousine. And then he put an improved model into a Duesenberg and took it down for time trials in Daytona. A Cummins-powered race car even ran in the 1930 Indianapolis 500. It didn't go all that fast, but to this day, it's the only car to complete the whole 500 without having to make a pit stop. The year after, I don't know about the driver. The year after that, Cummins himself was on the team driving a specially built Cummins diesel truck coast to coast on $11.22 worth of fuel. They had a scary moment when the brakes failed in California going down the west side of Cajon Pass into Los Angeles. They almost crashed into a freight train. But Plessy Cummins and the truck did survive, and they made newspaper headlines across the country. Despite the publicity, though, and the reason I'm telling this story is that the Cummins company, Cummins Diesel, failed to turn a profit for the first 18 years of its existence. They stayed in the red, draining funds from the Miller family until the late 1930s. So who would have thought, back in 1930, or even making a small profit in 1939, that the Irwin Union Trust would now be bankrupt, taken over by another bank several years ago, while their former subsidiary, Cummins Diesel, would now be one of the largest, most successful, most conscientious companies in the world. And I mention this because particularly as we roll through stewardship season, we need to be aware of great possibilities. Great things require vision and long-term effort because we don't know precisely where change is going to take us. And they require a pretty good dose of courage, too. And that goes for church communities just as much as anyone else, maybe more. But conscientious change can take us to very special places indeed if we can deal with the lumps and bumps on the way. Make no mistake, the human condition itself is a spontaneous relationship with the universe. We can try to learn the rules. That's what science and the study of ethics are about. But in the end, we cannot control that relationship or even fully understand it. Vital and wonderful though each human life is, we are also, as Sharon D. Welch writes, infinitesimal before the vastness and complexity that surround us. We have it in us to transcend instinct, but we have to remember the universe transcends us. Life before the vastness of the universe is not a simple walk. It has to be a courageous dance. We give our best to the universe. we receive from the universe in return, and really we won't find out until later whether the universe's gift to us was wonderful or terrible. And probably, as with the examples of car and truck engines, we will find out it's a combination of both, wonderful and terrible. In a very real sense, liberal religion embodies that unpredictable dance with the cosmos. I think it's safe to say that liberal religion is devoted to progress, to helping make the world a better place. We look at an unpredictable future in faith that the future can and should ultimately be better than the past. But that doesn't happen without courage and commitment and willingness to dance with change. Unitarian Universalists sometimes refer to ourselves as a church without a creed, but that's not really what's important about us. What's important about us is that we are a church of relationship and a church with a promise. We promise to be with one another and with the world in a loving and principled way. We promise to share and listen to one another, to care for one another in agreement, but also hopefully in disagreement, to support one another through joy and laughter, but also through tears and disappointment, all while staying present to an evolving universe and doing our best to evolve with it. Of course, religious words are easy. Religious living is difficult. Life rarely provides smooth sailing. It often takes us in directions that in no way did we ever plan to go. Our actions, no matter how carefully thought out, have unpredictable effects, multiple consequences for good or ill, often for both. But that is not a call to cling to our present situation or to try to avoid the challenges that life brings us. Rather, it's a call to embrace life and the knowledge that only by joyfully courting changes and challenges can we really hope to achieve a positive, liberal religious vision. Amen. May it be so. Happy dancing. And I invite you to close our service. Oh. That was an unexpected consequence. I'll take that one, though. Thank you. I invite you to join me in closing our service by standing as you're willing and able and so inclined, and joining in hymn number 1028 in the green hymnal, or on the screen, The Fire of Commitment. And hang in there with this one. If you haven't done it a lot of times, it's a little tricky on the timing, but we will persist and see what comes of it.
please join me in reading together the words that will appear on the screen as we extinguish our chalice and hang around for an announcement after that. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment that this we carry in our hearts until we are together again. I have an announcement from the search committee. Barbara Dickerson, Dick Miltner, Ginny Casey Leininger, and myself, we have a match. We can't share any names or details yet. We have to do a background check and so forth. But all parties are excited. And so this ends the search committee's task, and it passes off to the negotiating team, Barbara Dickerson, Dick Miltner, and Barb Ryder.